Because of the current virus situation, pharmaceutical stocks have had a lot of discussion recently. A lot of people think an FDA-approved vaccine could result in massive price jumps and massive gains for the investor who backed the winning horse. There's definitely a lot of discussion, large volume trades, and a lot of predictions. Not to mention tons of money is just being thrown around. Really, the first way to preface all of this discussion is to realize that pharmaceutical stocks are extremely complex when it comes to analysis. However, this simplifies when you get to smaller pharma companies. What do I mean by this? Well, take a look at Pfizer and BioNTech. Both of these companies are working together on a vaccine for the current virus, and they've made very large strides with their vaccine. Yet, when we look at stock prices, BioNTech, we see massive leaps in the stock price. And even though there have been corrections, we're at 66.5 compared to the start of the year, when we were all the way down at 13 or so. But when you take a look at Pfizer stock, it really hasn't changed much. Why is this if both of them are on the same team and providing the same vaccine? Well, the reality is, Bio is a very small company, at least comparably. They have a market cap of almost 16 billion, while Pfizer has a market cap of over 200 billion. Now, this vaccine would be absolutely fantastic for Pfizer and definitely bring in a lot of revenue, but it's honestly a relatively small amount of money compared to the rest of their business. Biotech, on the other hand, is literally 12.5 times smaller than Pfizer, so a successful vaccine for them would be massive. That would give the company a huge amount of cash flow and allow for future growth without needing to do things like take out loans, dilute the stock, or wait for smaller, steady income to accumulate. And this only gets exacerbated as you get smaller and smaller. Some of these really small companies that people are hyping up really don't have much of a robust portfolio, and much of their valuation seems to really just come from their chances of getting a successful vaccine out. So it becomes a game of risk and reward. Do you go for the smaller company because the price will rally higher? Or do you go for the larger company in fears that you won't know who's successful? And that's only one part of it. When we talk about the established players in this industry, like Johnson & Johnson, Aviv, or Pfizer, we need to look much closer than just the vaccine. Realize a lot of these companies are absolutely massive, and they do a lot more than just a single vaccine for a current issue. Johnson & Johnson especially is absolutely huge. These companies are making huge amounts of money off all sorts of drugs and chemicals, and knowing what is actually big can be difficult. Oftentimes, there's big news about a new drug that one of these companies is coming out with, but it ends up not being super influential because perhaps trials show it's less effective or more expensive than competitors. Maybe a patent is expiring for one of their competitors. Maybe it only treats certain symptoms or has giant side effects that make it rarely recommended. Or maybe it's actually a very minor drug that treats small issues. Honestly, if you look through a lot of the news for these companies and their drugs, talking about drug release news for these companies, you get these crazy exacerbated headlines that make it sound like each of these have FDA approval for cancer cures, when in reality it's a low production drug that treats the symptoms of a very rare and not particularly dangerous cancer or something like that. It takes a pretty thorough understanding and dedication to read through release papers in order to actually get some understanding of the marketplace for a new drug. Drug rejections can also be really huge. Tons of pumps and dumps happen when smaller companies are pending FDA approval on a potentially massive drug. If they get it, the price stays high and continues to grow. If they don't, it falls back off a cliff. Not to mention that the US market is massive and the drug laws here are kind of ridiculous. There's a lot of good videos out there talking about our system and why simple, old drugs can be very expensive. This video from Business Insider, Why Insulin is So Expensive, is a pretty decent video that goes into some of the basics on why some of these drugs are so expensive. But to kind of make a long story short, there are tons of laws and regulations that do things like prevent Congress from negotiating drug prices or preventing the import of certain drugs. It's really insane, and the system gets very complex the farther you look. Actually, fairly recently, pharma stocks took a hit when Trump released an executive order trying to address some of these insane drug price issues present in the United States. And that's another thing to realize. Much of these pharma profits are held up by laws or other regulations. If those change, we could see massive evaluation fluctuations in these companies. Now that we've discussed the risks, do we have a good idea of who's going to come out on top? Well, because it takes a while to build up a large supply of vaccines, many of these companies in trials have already made billions. Pfizer got $1.95 billion to produce vaccines, essentially hoping that if they pass the trials, the US will have a solid supply they can start using immediately. And this is not exclusive to Pfizer. This has happened with a lot of other companies as well. Essentially, the American taxpayer is footing the bill for the risk of these vaccines failing trials and us having billions of dollars of unusable drugs. RAPS.org has this fantastic chart of the different phases for each vaccine and links to additional information. But the big thing to realize is that vaccines typically take years to release. It does seem like we're going to have a very rushed trial for this vaccine, at least for any of them that come up successful. But because of rush trials and emergency use authorization, it's very difficult to actually say which company will end up on top. A lot of that could be who has the best political contacts and who can produce the most. There are also international politics to take into account. If a company in China creates something successful, they might not be inclined to sell internationally, and vice versa. Additionally, we may not want to accept a foreign vaccine. This might depend a lot on the documentation they have and if it seems fudged. In conclusion, I would be very wary about trying to play the vaccine game for profit, especially if you intend to use time-limited plays like options. It's extremely risky, and the timeline will be heavily influenced by unpredictable politics. Many of these stocks, like Johnson & Johnson, are excellent dividend stocks and pretty safe overall, but again, that makes any upside from them rather minor. Really, if you don't have a strong understanding of the pharma market, vaccine possibilities won't make it any simpler. If you want to jump into the stock market, I have a referral link in the description of this video to Webull. Webull is an online brokerage that I really think is fantastic. I use their phone and web app all the time. If you sign up, you can get up to 2 free stocks as well as 3 months of level 2 software, which is fantastic if you want to day trade or if you just want free stocks. It doesn't cost anything to sign up, and I'm personally a big fan.